In a small, quiet town lived a young woman named Sophie. Sophie was the only child of her parents, Henry and Martha, who were both well into their 60s. They had raised her with love, care, and all the values that they held dear. Henry had been a hard-working man, and Martha, a devoted mother, had dedicated her life to ensuring that Sophie had everything she needed. As they aged, their health began to decline. Henry developed heart problems, and Martha suffered from chronic pain in her joints, but they never complained. Their only concern was for Sophie's happiness. Sophie had always been a kind and caring daughter, the light of her parents' lives. But as she grew older, she became restless. She longed for something more, something beyond the quiet life she had always known. That something more came in the form of a young man named Alex. Alex was charming, handsome, and full of life. He was everything Sophie had ever dreamed of in a partner. They met at a local cafe, and it didn't take long for Sophie to fall head over heels in love with him. Alex was different from anyone she had ever known. He was exciting, adventurous, and promised her a life full of thrills and passion. But there was one problem. Alex didn't share the same love for Sophie's parents that she did. As their relationship grew more serious, Alex began to talk about leaving the small town. He wanted to move to the city where opportunities were endless and life was fast-paced. Sophie was torn. She loved her parents dearly, but she was also deeply in love with Alex. He promised her a life she had only ever dreamed of, and the thought of losing him was unbearable. One evening, as the sun set over the small house Sophie had always called home, Alex gave her an ultimatum. "Sophie," he said, taking her hands in his, "I love you, and I want to build a life with you. But I can't do that here. You need to choose, either come with me and live the life we've always talked about or stay here with your parents." Sophie's heart raced. She looked at Alex, the man she loved, and then thought of her parents, old and frail, who had given her everything. She knew that if she chose to stay, she would lose Alex forever. But if she left, she would be abandoning the two people who had always been there for her. That night, Sophie lay awake, torn between love and duty. She knew her parents needed her, but she also knew that she couldn't let go of the life Alex was offering her. The thought of losing him was too much to bear. The next morning, with a heavy heart, Sophie made her decision. She would go with Alex. She told her parents over breakfast, her voice trembling with guilt. "Mom, Dad," she said, "I love you both so much, but I've decided to leave with Alex. We're moving to the city to start a new life together." Martha's face went pale, and Henry's hands shook as he set down his coffee cup. "Sophie, please," her mother begged. "We're old, and we need you. We won't be able to manage on our own." But Sophie was resolute. "I have to do this, Mom. I love him. He's my future." Henry said nothing. He simply stared at his daughter, his heart breaking inside. He had always known this day might come, but he had hoped it wouldn't be so soon. Martha, tears streaming down her face, reached out and took Sophie's hand. "Please think about this. Don't leave us, not like this." Sophie pulled her hand away, her heart aching with the weight of her decision. "I'm sorry," she whispered, and with that she walked out the door. Sophie and Alex moved to the city, leaving behind the only home Sophie had ever known. The city was everything Alex had promised, bright, busy, and full of opportunities. They found an apartment, and Sophie threw herself into their new life together. But no matter how hard she tried to enjoy her new surroundings, a part of her was always thinking about her parents. She would call them sometimes, but the conversations were always brief and strained. Her parents didn't say much. They didn't want to burden her with their troubles. But Sophie could hear the sadness in their voices, especially in her mother's. She knew they were struggling, but she told herself that they would be okay, that they would manage without her. Back in the small town, Henry and Martha's health continued to decline. Without Sophie to help them, they found it harder and harder to take care of themselves. Martha's pain grew worse and Henry's heart condition became more serious. But what hurt them the most was the loneliness, the empty house, the silence and the absence of their beloved daughter. They missed her terribly, but they knew she was living her life, just as they had always wanted for her. As time went on, Sophie began to notice a change in Alex. He became distant, spending more time away from home and less time with her. At first, she told herself that he was just busy with work, but deep down she knew something was wrong. She tried to talk to him about it, but he brushed her off, saying he was just tired. One day, Sophie came home from work early, hoping to surprise Alex with a nice dinner. But when she walked into their apartment, she found him with another woman. Her heart shattered into pieces as she realized that the man she had given up everything for had betrayed her. Alex didn't even try to apologize. He simply shrugged and told her that things hadn't been working out between them for a while. Sophie felt like her world was falling apart. She had left her parents, her home, everything she had ever known, for a man who didn't love her the way she had loved him. Devastated, Sophie packed her bags and left the apartment that had once been her dream home. She wandered the city streets, tears streaming down her face, feeling more alone than she ever had in her life. She realized that she had made a terrible mistake. She had chosen a fleeting love over the enduring love of her parents, and now she had lost everything. With a heavy heart, Sophie decided to return home. She longed for the comfort of her parents, the warmth of the house she had left behind. She hoped that they would forgive her, that she could make things right again. When Sophie arrived back in her small town, the house was dark and quiet. She knocked on the door, but there was no answer. Panic rose in her chest as she fumbled for the spare key under the mat and let herself in. The house was cold and empty. The furniture was covered in dust, and the once vibrant garden was overgrown and neglected. Sophie's heart pounded in her chest as she called out for her parents, but the only response was the echo of her own voice. She found the answer she dreaded most when she entered the small living room. On the mantelpiece were 2 framed photographs, one of her father and one of her mother, both with black ribbons draped over them. Sophie's legs gave way and she collapsed to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. She had been too late. Her parents were gone. They had died alone, without their daughter by their side. Sophie could barely breathe as the reality of her choices crushed her. She had left the 2 people who had loved her more than anything in the world, and now they were gone forever. Through her tears, she found an old letter on the table. It was from her mother, written shortly before her death. With trembling hands, Sophie opened the letter and began to read. Dear Sophie, if you are reading this, it means that we are no longer with you. I want you to know that we never stopped loving you, even when you left. We understood that you had to live your own life, and we were happy that you found love, but we missed you every day, and our hearts ached with the hope that you would come back to us. I am writing this because I want you to know that we forgive you. Life is full of difficult choices, and sometimes we don't realize what we've lost until it's too late. I don't want you to carry the burden of guilt, my sweet girl. We loved you with all our hearts, and that love will never die. Be kind to yourself, and remember that we will always be with you, watching over you from above. With all my love, Mom. Sophie clutched the letter to her chest, her body racked with sobs. Her mother's forgiveness only deepened the pain she felt. She had been so blinded by her love for Alex that she had abandoned the people who had loved her unconditionally. And now there was no way to make it right. Sophie never forgave herself for what she had done. She stayed in the small town, living in the house that had once been filled with love and warmth, now a constant reminder of her loss. She visited her parents' graves every day, bringing flowers and talking to them, hoping that somehow they could hear her. She never found love again. The pain of her betrayal and the loss of her parents were too great. She lived the rest of her days in quiet sorrow, haunted by the choices she had made. The life she had once dreamed of with Alex had turned to ashes, and all she was left with was the bitter taste of regret.